Okay, so imagine this. You're on like a sinking ship, right?
Hmm.
And everyone's panicking.
Yeah.
But the captain, instead of, trying to get everyone to safety, he makes this whole big show of like throwing out this life raft,
Oh, wow.
promising everyone that they're going to be okay.
Right.
And people start to have a little hope. They think, okay, things might be all right.
Hmm.
And then right as people are about to grab on,
Yeah.
he yanks the raft right back in,
Oh, wow.
leaving everyone completely stranded.
Oh, that's rough.
That feeling, that gut punch of a broken promise.
Yeah.
That's kind of the heart of what we're looking at today in this deep dive.
Okay.
Jeremiah chapters 34 through 39.
Interesting.
It's a society just teetering on the brink of collapse.
Right.
And really a crash course in the consequences of ignoring those big commitments, those covenants that we make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Okay.
We're in Judah here, the southern kingdom of Israel.
Okay.
And things aren't pretty. Let's just say that.
Right. The prophet Jeremiah, he's going around warning everyone that total disaster is coming in these chapters. They're more than just like a history lesson.
Right.
They're like an X-ray of their society, showing us all these fractures that happen when a whole community forgets what it should stand for.
Yeah.
And especially how they treat the most vulnerable people, the ones who need them the most.
Right. Yeah. No, that's really important.
It is.
So let's jump right into it with chapter 34.
Okay.
We've got King Zedekiah.
Mm-hmm.
He's dealing with this huge threat from Babylon,
Mm-hmm.
and he makes this really dramatic move.
Okay.
He establishes a covenant to free all the Hebrew slaves.
Wow.
Like it's this big beacon of hope in the middle of all this craziness,
Yeah.
like a chance for them to turn things around.
Right.
But before we go any further, can we just talk for a second about what a covenant actually is?
Yeah, sure.
Because it's not just like any old promise, is it?
Not at all. It's a much bigger deal than that.
A covenant in this time period,
Mm.
especially when you're talking about divine law.
Right.
It's this incredibly binding agreement.
Okay.
It's not just a deal between people.
Mm.
It's seen as this sacred oath that invokes God's authority.
Wow.
And that comes with some serious weight,
Right.
So when Zedekiah makes this covenant,
Mhm.
he's not just like making some political move.
Right.
He's tapping into this deep well of religious and social expectation.
So it's a really public declaration that he's aligning himself with God's will.
Exactly.
But then, like you said, the Babylonians, they back off for a little while.
Yeah, just temporarily, though.
Right. And then Zedekiah,
Oh, he totally flips.
he does a complete 180.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking.
He re-enslaves the very same people that he just freed.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
It is. It's this huge betrayal on so many levels.
It really is. He's breaking faith with his people, violating God's law.
Mm.
And he's showing just total disregard for the people who are depending on him the most.
And of course, God is not okay with this.
Nope, not at all. He's not going to let that slide.
What does God say about it?
Well, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's basically, you haven't listened to me. You haven't given your people their deserved freedom.
Oh, wow.
It's like God saying, what are you doing?
Yeah.
This is not okay.
Right. Yeah, it's a really sharp condemnation of their morals, or like you said, their lack thereof.
Yeah, they've really lost their way.
Right. So it's not just about one king making a bad decision.
Mhm.
It's about this whole society going off the rails.
Right.
But I guess what I'm struggling with here is, was Zedekiah just a weak leader?
That's a good question.
Or was there something else going on?
It's tempting to just call him spineless and move on.
Right.
But I think if we dig a little deeper,
Yeah.
we start to see that this whole act of betrayal is like a symptom of a much bigger problem,
Okay.
like a societal sickness.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The fact that the nobles and the people, they just went along with this re-enslavement,
Mm-hmm.
it tells us that somewhere along the line, they totally lost sight of the values that were supposed to define them.
Well, like justice and compassion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like they forgot what it meant to be God's people.
Right. It's not even that they broke the covenant. It's
Yeah.
like they forgot what it even stood for.
Yeah, exactly.
So the broken promise to the slaves is like just one sign of this deeper rot, this turning away from their core principles.
Exactly.
And it makes me think about what happens today,
Oh, yeah.
all the ways that systems exploit people.
Yeah.
It's not always about one bad guy,
Right.
Sometimes it's about this whole messed up structure that's gone completely off the rails.
That's a great point. You're right.
So looking at Zedekiah's decision this way
Mhm.
helps us understand why God was so angry.
It does. It really does.
It exposed how morally bankrupt they had become.
Yes. And they were supposed to be a light to the world.
Right. Wow. Okay.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah, really heavy.
Let's maybe shift gears a bit
Okay.
to chapter 35. So this chapter introduces this group called the Rechabites,
Okay.
and they're nomads.
Interesting.
And they live by this incredibly strict code that's been passed down for generations.
Oh, wow.
Like they abstain from wine, they don't build permanent homes.
Wow.
They live this life of radical simplicity.
That's intense.
It is, right? On the surface, it seems kind of extreme.
Yeah, a little bit.
But I think there's something deeper going on here.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, the Rechabites, even with their, restrictive lifestyle, they're actually held up as an example of obedience.
Really?
Yeah. God contrasts their commitment to their ancestors' commands
Okay.
with the way that the Judahites are constantly disobeying him.
That's interesting.
It's ironic, right?
Yeah.
This group of nomads living out on the fringes, they seem more grounded in their faith than the people living in the supposed holy city.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is pretty ironic.
It is. And I think that's the whole point.
What do you mean?
I think their obedience, even though it seems weird to us,
Right.
is about something much bigger.
Okay.
It's not just about following the rules blindly. It's about loyalty, faithfulness to something beyond just themselves.
To their values.
Yes, exactly.
So their unwavering obedience, even though it might seem rigid from the outside,
Right.
it speaks to how deeply committed they are to their identity and their values. Like it's a stark contrast to the Judahites.
It is.
Who say they follow God, but then they ignore what he says all the time.
Exactly.
It makes me wonder if we're as devoted to our own values.
That's a great question to ask ourselves, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Like,
Yeah.
are we as dedicated to what we say we believe in as the Rechabites are to theirs?
That's a good point to reflect on.
Okay, so let's move on to chapter 36.
All right.
Now, this is where things start to get really intense.
Oh, yeah.
We've got Jeremiah dictating God's words to Baruch, who is his scribe.
Right.
And then Baruch goes and reads this scroll publicly, this message of warning and a call to repent.
There's a powerful scene.
And you can just feel the tension building as the scroll makes its way to King Jehoiakim.
Oh, yeah.
And then bam,
Oh, boy.
Jehoiakim completely loses it. He takes the scroll, cuts it up, and throws it in the fire.
He tries to destroy God's message, literally.
It's such a powerful image.
It is. It shows how far people will go to silence a truth that they don't want to hear.
But like you said, burning the scroll doesn't actually make the message go away.
Yep.
If anything, it just highlights how truth has this way of persisting no matter what.
I agree.
And I mean, think about how often this happens today.
Yeah.
Information gets buried. People get silenced just to try and control the narrative.
It happens all the time.
What do you think this says about the people in power?
Well, I think it shows a deep insecurity. This fear that their power is built on something really shaky.
Right.
And they know that the truth has the power to disrupt everything.
Exactly.
So they try to silence anyone who speaks truth to power.
Because they want to maintain the status quo, even if it hurts others. Yeah.
So burning the scroll isn't just this act of aggression.
Right.
It's an act of desperation.
It is.
It's clinging to power no matter the cost.
It really makes you think.
It does. It
Yeah.
makes you wonder what scrolls are being burned metaphorically today.
Yeah.
What truths are we trying to ignore?
That's a great question to think about.
And what will the consequences be if we keep doing that?
Yeah. That's something we'll need to consider as we look at the next chapters.
Yeah, because things get even worse for Jeremiah in the chapters
Yeah,
ahead.
they do.
Yeah.
He's going to face some really tough situations.
Yeah, in chapters 37 and 38, speaking truth to power gets him into some serious danger.
It does. He's falsely accused of treason
Oh.
just for delivering God's message.
And the people in charge didn't want to hear it.
Nope. They wanted to silence him
He's imprisoned, isolated, facing all kinds of threats.
just for telling the truth.
It's crazy.
And it gets even worse in chapter 38.
Tell me about it.
They throw him into a muddy cistern to die.
Wow.
It's a horrifying image, isn't it? It
Shows you how far people will go to eliminate those who challenge them.
to silence dissent.
Yeah, it's a chilling thought.
It really is. It makes you think about the risks that come with speaking truth to power.
It does. And it makes you ask yourself, am I willing to face those risks?
Am I willing to stand up for what I believe in, even if it costs me something?
Exactly.
But thankfully, even in this awful situation, there's this glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
We meet Ebed-Melech,
Oh, yes, Ebed-Melech.
this Cushite official who risks his own safety to get Jeremiah out of that cistern.
He's incredible.
He could have just ignored it,
Easily.
but he chose to do what was right.
She did. And it could have cost him everything.
Yeah. His
Sure.
courage is a real testament to the power of individual conscience.
It really is. He saw an injustice and he acted.
It gives me hope.
Me too.
It shows that even in the most corrupt systems, people can still choose to do good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that Abimelech isn't even one of the chosen people.
Right.
He's a foreigner, but he shows more compassion than a lot of the Israelites.
Yeah, he does. It
Yeah.
really challenges our assumptions about who's righteous and who's not.
It reminds us that God's grace isn't limited by human categories.
Exactly.
His actions show that true righteousness goes beyond social and religious labels.
I agree.
It's about doing what's good and just no matter what.
That's a great way to put it.
And it makes you wonder, are we willing to be that courageous?
It's a question we all have to ask ourselves,
Are we willing to challenge the norms even when it's hard?
especially when it's hard.
Yeah, that's a great point. It takes us right into chapter 39,
Oh, yeah. This is where it all comes to a head.
where we see the consequences of Judah's choices.
And those consequences are devastating.
Yeah, the Babylonians break through, Jerusalem falls. King Zedekiah is captured.
It's the end of his reign.
The city is destroyed.
It's a moment of complete devastation.
It's a reminder that actions have consequences.
Yes, for individuals and for whole societies
And it shows the difference between trusting in earthly power.
versus something more permanent.
Zedekiah, he tried to rely on politics and military strength.
And it failed him completely.
He lost everything.
His kingdom, his freedom,
Maybe even his sanity.
possibly.
But Jeremiah, even after all the persecution and imprisonment,
Right.
he never wavered in his faith in God.
He was steadfast.
And he's ultimately spared.
It's a powerful contrast.
It really is. It shows that true security isn't about our circumstances.
It's about something deeper.
Yeah, something that transcends the ups and downs of life.
Exactly. Jeremiah's story, even in the ruins of Jerusalem,
Mm-hmm.
it offers this really compelling alternative.
What's that?
Finding strength and peace in something bigger than ourselves.
Even when everything seems to be falling apart.
Especially when everything seems to be falling apart.
We'll dive deeper into that and more when we come back.
Stay with us. Welcome back. You know, as we're going through these chapters in Jeremiah, I'm just struck by how relevant they still are today.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Like, it's easy to think about these stories as ancient history, you know, but these themes keep coming up. Betrayal, faithfulness,
Yeah.
courage in the face of opposition.
Mm-hmm.
Those resonate across time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And one thing that really stuck with me was that image of the burning scroll.
Oh, yeah.
King Jehoiakim destroying God's words like that.
Right.
It felt like it meant something bigger, you know?
I think so, too.
What do you think it represents, like, in today's world?
Well, it's a powerful image for how we try to silence the truth, especially when it makes us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's like we might not be burning actual scrolls anymore,
Right.
but we still have ways of dismissing things, you know,
Mm-hmm.
distorting information, censoring stuff that challenges our worldview.
Right. Or that exposes things we don't want to see.
Exactly.
It's like we build these mental firewalls
I like that analogy.
to filter out anything that might disrupt our little bubbles.
Or carefully curated information bubbles.
Exactly. But what's the cost of that?
That's the big question, is
Like, are we really growing if we're only hearing what we want to hear?
That's the problem. We risk becoming stagnant, you know,
Okay.
intellectually immoral.
Wow.
We miss out on the chance to really challenge ourselves.
To learn and grow.
Exactly. To become more well-rounded people.
And isn't that part of what Jeremiah's story is all about?
I think so.
He never shied away from speaking truth to power, even when it meant going to prison.
He was fearless
He knew that real faithfulness sometimes means disrupting the status quo.
and challenging authority.
It takes guts to do that.
It does.
It's sad.
Especially when you're facing that kind of opposition.
Absolutely. And it's not always about these huge acts of defiance either, right?
No, you're right.
It's about cultivating that inner strength.
That inner voice.
Yeah, to speed up, even in small situations.
To stand up for what's right.
To resist that urge to just go along with things when we know something's wrong.
Exactly.
Which brings us back to Ebed-Melech,
Oh, yes. Ebed-Melech.
who didn't even hesitate to act when he saw what happened to Jeremiah.
He's as incredible.
He could have just looked the other way.
So easy.
But he did what he believed was right, even though it was risky.
He was a true example of courage.
And what I find so interesting is that he's not even an Israelite.
Right.
He's a foreigner.
But he shows more compassion than many of the people who are supposed to be God's followers.
I know. It's amazing.
It really challenges our assumptions about who's righteous and who isn't.
Totally.
Mm.
It's a good reminder that true righteousness goes beyond those labels.
Absolutely.
It's about doing what's good and just no matter what.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. It makes you ask yourself, would I do the same?
Would I have that kind of courage?
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about silencing the truth and having the courage to act.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another big theme running through these chapters
What's that?
where we place our trust.
Oh, that's a good one.
You know, we see this stark contrast between Zedekiah,
Yeah.
who puts his faith in politics and military strength,
And Jeremiah, who trusts in God.
and the outcomes are completely different.
They are.
Zedekiah ends up losing everything.
His kingdom, his freedom,
Everything.
possibly his sanity.
But Jeremiah, he goes through so much,
He does.
but he comes out of it with this sense of inner peace.
Like his faith was an anchor.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't that he didn't suffer, but his trust in God gave him the strength to get through it.
And to stay true to himself,
It's like he had this foundation that could withstand anything.
which is something we could all use a little more of these days, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in everything,
The anxieties, the uncertainty,
to cling to things that don't really matter.
wealth status, fleeting pleasures.
But Jeremiah's story reminds us that there's a different way,
To ground ourselves in something deeper.
something that lasts.
That's a powerful message, especially in the world we live in today.
So much chaos and uncertainty.
Jeremiah's story is a message of hope.
Hope even in the midst of destruction.
Exactly.
And speaking of destruction, I think we need to spend some time talking about what happens when Jerusalem falls in chapter 39.
Yeah, that's a pivotal moment.
It is. It's where everything comes crashing down.
The Babylonians, they break through the walls. Zedekiah tries to escape, but he's captured.
His sons are executed right in front of him.
It's brutal. He's blinded and taken to Babylon.
It's a devastating end to his reign.
It is hard to even imagine what people went through during that time.
The suffering, the trauma.
It must have been horrific.
But even in the midst of all that, there's still a glimmer of hope.
There is. What are you thinking of?
Well, Jeremiah,
Yes.
after everything he's been through,
The imprisonment, the threats,
he's spared.
the Babylonians, they recognize him as a prophet.
And they treat him with respect.
It's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It makes you think that sometimes our allies come from the most unexpected places.
That's true. And it shows that doing what's right doesn't always mean things will be easy.
Yeah. In fact, it can be really hard.
It often leads to suffering.
But that doesn't mean it's not worth it.
It doesn't diminish its value,
What matters is staying true to what we believe in, even when it's tough.
even when it costs us something.
Exactly. It takes us back to the core message of these chapters,
Which is
aligning ourselves with what's true and just no matter the consequences.
having that inner strength to stand by our convictions.
Even when everything around us is crumbling.
It's a powerful message.
But how do we apply that to our own lives?
That's the question, isn't it?
It's easy to admire Jeremiah from afar,
Right.
but how do we have that kind of courage in our own lives?
That's something we'll explore as we continue our deep dive.
We've been going through these really powerful chapters of Jeremiah, exploring all these ideas like broken promises and misplaced trust
Right.
and this unwavering faithfulness.
Yeah.
But what's been sticking with me
Mhm.
is how much these ancient stories feel so relevant today.
Like it's a reflection of our own times.
Totally. It's like holding up a mirror.
You see Judah making all these mistakes.
Ignoring justice, silencing the truth.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder,
Makes you wonder what?
are we doing the same thing?
Ignoring our own problems.
Yeah. Are we ignoring the cracks in our own foundation?
It's a scary thought.
It is. It's
Yeah.
unsettling. But even in all that chaos and destruction,
Mhm.
we see people like Jeremiah and Ebed-Melech
Right.
choosing a different path.
A better path.
And what's so powerful is that their strength.
It doesn't come from their position or anything like that.
Exactly. It's not about titles or status.
It comes from somewhere deeper.
It does. It's like this inner strength that comes from integrity and compassion.
And a commitment to doing what's right.
Yeah. It's a power that can't be bought or intimidated.
You can't silence that kind of power.
And that's what's so important for us to remember today.
I agree.
We might not be facing literal armies and collapsing cities,
Right.
but we're definitely living in a time with a lot of challenges.
There's so much uncertainty.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed,
To just give up.
to become cynical or apathetic.
Oh, we can't.
We can't. But Jeremiah shows us that we're not powerless.
We have a choice.
Yeah, we might not be able to control everything that happens around us.
But we can control how we respond.
Exactly. We can choose to be like Jeremiah,
Speaking truth to power.
standing up for justice.
Holding on to our convictions.
Or we can be like Ebed-Melech,
Stepping up to help those in need.
refusing to be part of systems that hurt people.
Choosing compassion over convenience.
It's about understanding that even small acts of courage and kindness,
They can make a difference.
They can have a ripple effect.
Our choices matter.
They do. We all have the power to change the world.
One interaction